Welcome to the Thriving Outside the Box podcast. Join me, Dr. Kimberly Grocher, a licensed psychotherapist, executive coach, and yoga and mindfulness meditation teacher, as I shed light on the stories of leaders and entrepreneurs across industries who not only dare to create their own path in their careers, businesses, and lives, but have found a way to do it while thriving mentally, physically, and spiritually. I hope you walk away with the inspiration to do the same. So welcome, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Thriving Outside the Box. I am Dr. Kim Grocher, your host, and I'm very excited today to be with my colleague, Dr. Daniel Knoepflmacher.
Yes,
is that right?
That's exactly right. Yeah.
Dr. Daniel Knoepflmacher. Okay.
A lot of people, they just say Dr. K.
Yes,
but
that's
really it's Daniel, as we talked about. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. I know at Weill Cornell, we are in the habit of calling you Dr. K. So I just wanted to make sure I was saying that correctly.
I
So
appreciate that.
Daniel, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Sure. Yeah. So I'm Daniel Knoepflmacher. I'm a psychiatrist. I think that's kind of the first thing I do, but I wear a lot of different hats beyond that job. So I see patients, outpatient practice, but I really, my main thing that fills most of my days is I run a residency training program for psychiatry residents to teach them how to become psychiatrists. They come in as medical students, they graduate as practicing psychiatrists after 4 years. And that's a lot of my time and my passion goes into that. I have another title in the department, which is meaning the Department of Psychiatry at Weill Cornell, which is how I first met you at Weill Cornell. Mm-hmm. And that's a job title that doesn't really mean anything when you hear it. It's the vice chair for education. But what that actually means is that there's all these different components of education. We're at an academic institution, and I am overseeing the different programs we have, from teaching medical students related to psychiatry to the other training programs in addition to the one that I run. And then it actually has grown into continuing education for clinicians of all different types, and even beyond our institution is something that we're starting to try to grow. And then public education is something that I think is important too. And that leads to one other piece of work that I've been doing, which is I started a podcast a few years ago, which you and I have been talking about because you're also a podcaster now. So those are just things beyond being a dad and a husband, which obviously are a big part of my life that I do.
Awesome. So we met several years ago when I was working full-time at Weill Cornell. Now I'm voluntary faculty, and we've had a chance to interact in the last few years, informally, but formally also in the residency program.
Yes.
Yep. So one of the things that always stood out to me, though, when I was at Cornell, was that you had a film background, and I never really got a chance to talk to you about that until recently.
Yeah, no, I guess that's part of the out of the box part, right? I think all of us, I know this is true having talked to you, and certainly think this is just human, is that we carry our pasts with us in so many different ways. But in this case, even in my career, I had an entire different career before I decided to go to medical school and then go to residency and become a psychiatrist. And that was working in the film industry. So it started with, after graduating from college, going to film school. I went to USC for film school and got an MFA in film production there. And it really translated quite quickly into working because I had to pay off those loans. And what I fell into was doing editing of films and television. And that eventually evolved into becoming what's called a trailer editor. editing the theatrical trailers that you see when you go to the movies before the movies start, or actually a lot more of the television spots that you see on TV about the movies. So that's what I made my living doing until I got really fed up with it and said, I want to go to medical school and become a psychiatrist.
Wow. Okay. So let's pause for a second. What was it about working as an editor, trailer working in that industry that got you fed up?
Yeah, it's a good question because I guess I should rewind even a little further back. I'm the child of two immigrant parents. My dad came to this country and ended up becoming an English professor, even though English wasn't his first language. But as part of that, was always very interested when thinking about authors, about the psychology of the authors and kind of even more psychoanalytic theories that go into creating fiction and narratives. And then my mom was a social worker, family therapist. So that's the house I grew up in. And I ended up finding that, as I got older, entering high school, I was the guy that would talk to all my friends about their problems. I was interested, I was curious, but I also felt like, oh, maybe I can help. What was I thinking? I had no experience, but I would listen. And back then, that was when phones were still attached to the walls through cords, and I would get in trouble with my parents because I'd be lying on the floor talking on the phone, into the night, and they're like, "What if someone's trying to call us? There's no call waiting." So that was sort of in my head, and I thought I would go to my mom at work and see psychotherapists and psychiatrists that also worked in some of the places where she did. And I said, you know what? I think being a psychiatrist seems really cool. So I went to college thinking that's what I was going to do. At the same time, that was one piece of it. In high school, I was a big theater nerd. I was also a wrestler, so it was kind of all over the place. But I loved acting. Took acting classes since I was about 10 years old and was in a lot of the plays in school. And so that was an interest. I didn't think I was going to become an actor. I had a teacher once who kind of dissuaded me from doing that because she said it's a miserable life. And you have to go through so much hell to get there. And so somehow I took that in. But there's that piece as well. So I went to college saying, I want to be a doctor. I want to pursue psychiatry. I got into the first semester, it was college. I went to school in New York City at Columbia, and there was so much going on, and there were all these cool activities. I joined the radio station, was involved with that, and then of course I had to take my classes in pre-med, and the first one was chemistry, and I didn't like it in high school. I got there, the teacher who was teaching it actually had this book that she was writing that she hadn't even finished yet, so it was just this stack of Xeroxes, and she was like, "This is your textbook for this class." I didn't last more than 6 weeks. I dropped it. And I was like, to hell with pre-med. I love all this liberal arts stuff. Got really interested in Islam, became a religion major, and then, was trying to decide what am I going to do with that. It was the age of independent film. And that felt like, oh, cool. I'm really interested in culture. I'm interested in people's stories, psychology. I love film. I like the acting. I had the radio background. I'm going to go to film school. So I managed to go to film school. And then that's where, I came thinking I want to tell stories. I'm interested in the story of immigrants, of diversity, of the stories that aren't told in America. I learned about film production. I really got into writing and editing. And then those loans were stacking up. I was like, okay, I need a job. I fell into doing some editing work. And then I finally found this job, which I got into the union for editors. It's called the Motion Picture Editors Guild, doing this work for movie trailers. And movie trailers are like narrative on speed plus cocaine plus whatever other stimulant. It's like I was sometimes cutting 15-second spots trying to tell the story of a movie in 15 seconds to get people interested to want to see it. And It was incredibly stressful because there was a ton of pressure on us. The studios were spending all this money. Executives were stressed out because they were worried about their jobs. They were screaming at us. My bosses were screaming. It was very supportive, psychologically safe work environment. So there was that element of it. And I was finding that my body was like keeping the score, I guess, and taking a toll on me. I was gaining weight. I was developing medical problems I'd never had before. I had back pain for the first time in my life, gained a ton of weight, as I said, and was starting to realize that when I was going to the studios and hearing about the movies being made, the stories, that what I was doing, the marketing, was almost driving some of the stories that were being chosen and being told, which was not what really got me interested in film. And it was the human stories and kind of the more quirky, interesting things that I connected with were not the ones that often were being made. And that the marketing was often the tail wagging the dog. And I wasn't feeling fully fulfilled in that. And I was seeing how unhealthy it was for me. And it all kind of came together. I was like, this is not what I came to do. I'm interested in human narratives. I'm interested in the human experience. I had this interest in psychiatry early on. What am I doing? And it came down to one time where my wife, Amy, she was pregnant. And we had bought our first house. We were living in that house. And she said, you know what? I'm going to get away. I have a college friend. I'm going to leave LA and we're going to spend a weekend in Palm Springs. And I was by myself and staying in that house. And while she was gone, I made this decision in my head. It came like a lightning bolt. I'd been thinking about it, but I was like, no, I'm going to do this. It's kind of weird thinking about it now. I can't even remember how that felt, that it just became clear to me. And I said, I want to go and become either a psychiatrist or a psychologist. At that point, I was thinking, and I need to ask Amy what she thinks about this. And then she came back from her trip away and I dropped that bomb and I was like, what do you think? And it was crazy. I was expecting shock. I was like anger or whatever. She just sort of stood there. She's like, I think it's something, you can do. And that meant really disrupting her life and her making sacrifices. And so it was a big moment.
Wow. So this is audio as we know, but like, I wish you could see my face because I'm just like, because we've talked about this before. I also have a film background and it's interesting because I had the same experience. I actually went into school pre-med and psychology, fell in love with film in undergrad, was into radio, and I took chemistry. And I was like, yeah, no, I guess we're not going to medical school. So
when you've told me all that, I was like, this is crazy.
Yes.
The similarity. Yeah.
Exactly. And then we kind of diverged a little bit because I did go to social work school because my thought was like, well, let me eat and I can work on the film stuff on the side. But also connecting to a lot of what you said, I miss that field a lot sometimes, or sometimes I wish I'm like, what would that look like to be in that now or do that? And I did eventually go back and get a master's in media studies. But you're right. Like when you are creative and you're interested in the stories and you're interested in telling them and the visual aspect, but the industry surrounding it, oh my gosh, I don't think people really realize it looks really great. It looks, it's entertainment. It looks flashy and everything, but it's a lot of pressure. And it's working with a lot of people that have their own unchecked stuff.
For sure. For sure. I mean, and I still have a lot of friends in that world who I knew from when I worked in film and then also from film school. And I was out in LA actually for the annual meeting for psychiatry, I guess it was last year. And after the strike and all of that, it just feels even harder than ever. And I've really felt for people because with things that are happening in our economy, with AI, with all this kind of stuff, I feel like that field is even more stressful. And it didn't have as much of a framework for I'm trying to think of the words that you use describing it, sort of that more unhealthy workplace aspect. I think that maybe there's been some reckoning over the past 10 years, but there isn't as much of that because it's a little bit of a freelance, like you come in, you come out. It's not like other workplaces that way. And there obviously all of the bad stuff that happened with Me Too, a lot of that was focused in that world as well. So, all of those things together, it feels like an especially tough time in that world.
Yeah. I want to put that against how people think about medical school and residency and working in medicine, right? So it's like you're jumping from one frying pan into another. So tell me more about that pivot.
Such a good question, because it's like, really, you want to go to medical? I mean, honestly, there were people when I told them that I was going to go to medical school, my colleagues that were like, "Are you crazy? Like we go to premieres, we do this creative work. Like, why would you do that?" I think the first step for me was, can I do it? The first thing I did is I took a calculus class online, because I did not take math in college. As I told you, I was liberal arts. I didn't make it through that chemistry class. So I just had to prove to myself that I could do it. And I was able to. And then I had to go back and I had to do the post-bac, the post-college pre-med stuff that I hadn't taken before. And that was another big test. And taking chemistry even the first time. And you know what? It was totally different. It was totally different than when it was in college.
What do you think made it different?
Yeah, I think it was that I was more mature, for starters. I think I was a late maturer. Like, I give total credit to people who were pre-med and went straight to medical school. I could not have done. I didn't know that till I had to leave chemistry, but I was somebody who needed to, bake in the oven a little longer before I was able to do that. I also think the experience, which was very stressful and difficult in ways that we described in my prior career, made me really appreciate being in a classroom and where my only goal was to learn. It wasn't to deliver something with a deadline and have people scrutinize it and then sometimes get feedback that didn't make any sense, because that's what, I won't get into all the details, but that's what market testing said, which had nothing to do with the creative process and all that kind of stress and people screaming and all of that. Here I was like, this is just me, this subject, and a test. And that's there was something beautiful about that at that point in my life. And the other thing with medical school, specifically to answer your actual question, was by the time I got there, the way that medical school set up is there's, at least traditionally, there's 2 years in the beginning that are more like just fire hose of information that you have to absorb in classrooms. And then the last 2 years are clinical, where you're this junior person on the team, helping the care for patients in the hospital and going around and learning about the different specialties. That first half, it was rough. I wasn't as good as a lot of my classmates, but I was good enough and I was interested and eager to learn enough, as I said, with those other things. The other thing that I really noticed was I was already in my post mid 30s, like the upper end of my mid 30s. And my classmates were mostly much younger. They were like, who am I going to date? Does that person like me or not? Like, I was like, I've got wife, I've got kids at home. I want to be there, spend time with them, then go and study when I have time. I didn't have any choices like they had. Of like, should I go to that party tonight? Like, does that person like me? Like, I don't have time to worry about any of that stuff. It was like, be there when my family needed me and get my work done. And so that was kind of clarifying and organizing for me for that part. And then the second half, where you are on a team, if you worked a job and you're more experienced at like working on a team or delivering things, you're actually quite good at that part, because if you're helpful, you say, what do I do? You figure out how they give you challenges, you do them. It's people skills, it's working, being comfortable with somebody who's going through something that's really hard and being there. All of those kinds of skill set, they come into play during that part. And that was stuff that my life experience had already given me. So I think I had, I guess, an advantage at that point.
That's awesome. Like all the things you went through before actually prepared you for this.
I mean, listen, I think that's true for all of us. I mean, you just described your life and it was meandering too, similar to mine. Do you regret anything that you've done, that you studied this or that at that time?
None of it. None of it. I always talk about that movie Slumdog Millionaire. I feel like that's how life has been. Things happen and then later you're like, oh, okay, that's what that was for.
I think about that with my kids all the time, because they question what they're doing or they're like, this is a waste. And I said, you don't know how this is going to help you later. You just don't know. And the people you meet, and I mean, look at you and I. Here we are talking like this, like we had talked at other points, and we know that we would be doing a podcast together 3 years ago.
Nope. No. That's so cool. Okay, so you finished and then you went to residency.
Yes.
Yeah. So where did you go to medical school?
So I went to medical school on the West Coast. I was, living in LA, and my in-laws lived in Portland, Oregon. And we had a baby at the time, and LA was expensive. Portland was at that point a lot less expensive. And so we sold our place in LA and moved to Portland, where we had, in my case, in-law support, from people who could take care of our kids when Amy was working or when I was studenting, and so that was a big part of that move. Then came the post-bac, which I did all there in the local state school there, Portland State University, took all those classes I needed. And then it was, where do I go to medical school? I knew that I wanted to come back to New York. I love New York. I feel at home here. I feel like in mental health and psychiatry, it's just, there's so much going on here. People do, it's like therapies in the water here,
Yes.
And so I had a feeling that I wanted to get back to New York. But then the question became, do I go to med school in New York or do I stay in Portland where we have all this support? And I had a discussion with Amy and I listened to her. She said, you know what, at this point, it's going to be better for us to stay in Portland, even though, I think New York does make sense for the future. Our kids will be older. We already had our second child at that point. And so I went to the medical school right there in Portland, Oregon, which is called Oregon Sciences University. And then came back to New York to Weill Cornell for residency.
Awesome. So even in psychiatry, you've still kind of done things out of the box. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. Like, what is out of the box in psychiatry? I think applying to psychiatry, I was what's called a non-traditional applicant. I didn't do the typical path to get here. I was, older than everybody else in my class. And I'm sure that 98% of the people who were applying, with me. So that was out of the box. I think that, once I was a resident, I don't know if I did things differently other than that I brought that whole past life with me. And I think I was a parent. So like I would understand what parents who I was working with as patients were going through in a way that maybe some of my classmates didn't, working with children, because that's part of what we do in our residency training. And then thinking about my career, I think I was approaching that from a different perspective than some of my classmates, frankly, because there was a lot of pressure on getting it done and making a living again because I was taken out of the workforce as a student.
Mm-hmm.
I did do some freelance editing to
Mm-hmm.
make ends meet here and there as I was leading up to med school. But once I was in med school, I wasn't working, and getting back to the workforce was something I was very focused on too.
Yeah. I have two questions actually. One, are the things you're doing now, so like you're seeing patients, right? But you also do these other like educational activities. You brought in the podcast, how are you even now kind of creating your path? Because I even know from working there, right? After you finished residency and you were like part of the faculty and stuff, you were always just kind of like, it's the education, and I was the vice chair, and now it's the
Yeah,
podcast. Yeah, like,
that's a question I ask myself every day is like, how do I choose my path? And in some ways, the path that I took was even meandering once I left residency.
mm-hmm,
I did become a faculty member here. I did become a psychiatrist at Weill Cornell,
mm-hmm,
but I did a million different things, and it changed almost every year, except for a period for a few years where I had one job. But I started right in the beginning, literally doing like four different jobs. One was overseeing resident patients in a resident outpatient clinic. Another was working in medical student mental health, and then got a job at Rockefeller University, starting a kind of occupational mental health program there. There were a lot of different things going on. I still also had my own outpatient practice separate from that. And I was involved in some resident teaching, supervising. That continued to kind of change every year. And then about 3 years after that, there was an opportunity for me to get one job, full-time job in the partial hospital program,
mm-hmm,
partial hospitalization program, which is an intensive outpatient treatment program in psychiatry.
mm-hmm,
And that was an awesome opportunity because I love outpatient work. It's a teamwork setting where it's completely collaborative. It's a team of social workers, psychiatrists, and other mental health professionals working together, a lot of group work, family work, individual work. So it was perfect. I loved that job and went into that with just, again, on the side, having my own outpatient practice. And then the pandemic hit, rocked everybody's world. And in our case, it was first we were even doing the treatment by phone before we had Zoom set up. Then we did it all on Zoom. And meanwhile, the residency, as you can imagine, was completely turned upside down.
yeah,
And the person who preceded me, her name was Julie Pensner, she got a job at Duke. And for family reasons, that was the right opportunity for her.
mm-hmm,
And she ended up leaving. And then that created an opening for that job. Now, I was not planning to be a program director in psychiatry. That was not on my ambitions list. And if you had asked me a year before, are you going to be that? I would say, no, I would that's not even part of my plan.
mm-hmm,
But when this happened, I talked to her. I talked to one of my mentors who had been at that job before when I was a resident.
mm-hmm,
And they were like, you should consider it. I think, and I really contemplated it. And again, this is at a time when the world was upside down. Interestingly, I made another transition during 9/11 where I was doing more screenwriting
mm-hmm,
and I had stopped editing as a trailer editor. I was completely freelancing and working on screenplays. 9/11 happened and I said, I'm stopping screenwriting and just go full time being a trailer editor. So now that as we're talking, I'm just thinking about this, like these kind of big world events somehow have helped catapult certain decisions. And at that point, I decided to go for it and I applied.
mm-hmm.
And then I became the program director. And then after that, the vice chair for education. And these were opportunities, honestly,
Mm-hmm.
between you and me and everyone who's listening. I'm not sure if the pandemic ever happened that I would have been given those opportunities.
Yeah.
I think it's worked out well that I have gotten them. I hope and believe that people are happy that things are going okay.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know that I would have been on that path at all. So some of this is about life happening and you evaluating things and making choices And that sort of, I guess, out of the box transition, that was certainly out of the box for me,
Yeah.
was not something I was planning. I just was presented with that opportunity, had some people I trust tell me to consider it, and then ended up deciding to go for it.
Awesome. Awesome. So, in all of this, how did you stay well?
I'll be honest, I haven't always stayed well. I think during that first period when I took on the job as the program director, it was overwhelming. It was still the pandemic, and I was working too hard.
Mhm.
And I think it took a toll on my mental health. I think it took a toll on my body. I've developed some medical problems that, I've since gotten treatment for, that I live with, but they started during that time. I'm not sure that that's, an accident or a coincidence that that happened. But what I've found is that through having my own therapy,
Mhm.
and really focusing on my wellness more, adopting lifestyle choices like meditation, physical exercise, which I was not doing consistently before I had all of this added stress in these roles.
Mhm.
That integrating those things into my life, and then I think parallel, just becoming more confident and comfortable with the jobs that I had and not succumbing to that voice of like, you're going to fail. Do you really know what you're doing? You're going to be found out that you're an imposter, that you aren't qualified for this, all those kinds of voices in my head, being
Mhm.
able to feel confident enough to say, you know what, I'm not perfect, but I think I can do a good job at this and have a more healthy approach to the work that I was doing. That all happened at the same time. So there were like specific actions taken and then an internal process.
Yeah. I appreciate your honesty with that. I think a lot of times when people are asked that question, it's like, oh, I do this and I do this and I do this. And so you acknowledge that, like, it has been a journey. It hasn't always looked like this. It is an active practice. Things have happened, as a result of the stress, as a result of the pressure, as a result of the feeling like an imposter, the just all the pressure. And that you are actively working like every day to be well. It isn't just one thing.
I mean, I don't know how you feel as a psychotherapist,
Mhm.
or as a coach, but I think our own experiences, overcoming hardship, learning about ourselves, figuring out how to be well when things are hard, and then gaining confidence, experience, resilience from having gone through that. I think it makes it easier or better when I'm working with people to try to support them through hardship because I've been there. I mean, I may not have been there in the same way. I'm not,
Mhm.
for a moment, comparing anything I've been to some of the trauma I've seen that others have faced.
Mhm.
But I've been there in the sense that I've felt at moments like things are not going to get better, that I'm in a corner, that I'm losing hope, and that I've worked through it and come out on the other side, that gives me some sense of belief in when I'm trying to convince other people that that's going to be the case.
Yes, yes, absolutely. I think that's so important being able to tap into that human side, that human experience of saying, like, yes, it's a different experience, but I can also relate to that, not being sure, not knowing where to start, wanting something to change, but not. It's not that you're not invested, but it's like, where do I begin? Where do I even get the oomph to do this? And then, like you said, dealing with trauma or whatever came up in the past, I do think it helps a lot as a practitioner. What's also interesting with what I was thinking when you were talking was when you were talking about like that imposter syndrome. And I know that's common in a lot of workplaces and industries and stuff. But I do think there's something very different about what we do because in most places, like there's a ladder to climb, like, okay, you got this competency. Okay, great. And now you got this competency. Okay. So as you go, you might increase your confidence. But for us, the bar is always changing because no two people are the same. And so you feel like you're sitting with one person, you're like, oh, okay, I've got this. And then something else happens with somebody else, and you're like, oh my gosh, am I doing this right? Am I helping you? Am I messing you up more? Like, it's a lot.
I think that's why we have supervisors or
Mhm.
peer supervisors.
Mhm.
I'm knocking on my colleagues' doors down the hall to
Mhm.
just connect with them and ask or share those kinds
Yep.
of things that you just said. And I do that for others.
Mhm.
And I'm sure that happens in other workplaces, but I feel like it's so important in
Yes.
our work because otherwise you're alone with yourself and with other people's problems.
Mhm.
And that is double the loneliness, double the weight.
Yes, absolutely. In private practice, I definitely seek out consultation. I pay for it. I also have peers I talk to, different groups, staying in training and things like that. And like you said, having people to kind of bounce those things off of or share that with, because that's a lot to hold in addition to the other aspects of the job.
Not to mention, then our own lives aren't always perfect. Things
Exactly.
happen, and
Exactly.
so yeah.
Is there any question that I didn't ask you that you wish I asked you? I always like to end with that.
Wow. Yeah. There's two things that I think are really important. I don't even know what the question would be that this is the answer to, but it's things that I think have been real threads that I expect based on having talked to you and the similarities
Mhm.
in your experiences and your interests that really I cling to when I think about this work and when I think about the path that I have ahead.
Mhm.
And the two pieces are story
Mhm.
and humanity.
Yeah.
I think that they're also very connected to each other. I see story as key to everything that I've done. I think it's actually important part of for all of us and all we do. Story, being able to tell our own story, being able to hear other people's stories, even outside of the therapeutic setting,
Mhm. Yes.
is an important part of human connection. But really being curious about stories, which is the whole idea of your podcast, right?
Yep.
To do that when you're helping somebody who's struggling to understand what in their story got them to this place, or how does their story impact them when they're feeling this way at this point in their life. I think thinking about ourselves in as part of a story is often helpful as we're trying to decide our path. And I think that our field, mental health, psychology, psychiatry,
Mhm.
social work, we sometimes need to do a better job of telling the story of what we do because I
Yes.
think there's people out there who are afraid of getting help. I think they don't understand, understandably, what they're feeling or
Mhm.
experiencing. And if we can get the message out there so they don't feel as alone and they know that there are things that they can do to help them, that storytelling is really important, which comes to the podcast, which comes to, you know, going out there and telling people about mental health in a way that they understand and feels real and compelling for them, I think is really important. So story, whether that's writing a screenplay, editing a movie, or, understanding someone's story in therapy, I think is really important. The humanity part, humanism, human connection, I worry about that in our world right now. And I
Mhm.
see that in the work that I do, isolation, social isolation, polarization that
Mhm.
is become a big part of our society, unfortunately. I'm not here to theorize about why that's the case.
Mhm.
Obviously, people talk about technology, social media. I was on the train yesterday, saw everybody on the train looking down at their phone. I was just didn't have, I happened to not have my phone in my hand. Often I do. But at that moment, I said, wow, when I was 10, if I was on this train, nobody would be just staring at a screen. Every single person is looking at their own screen. Obviously, that has an impact.
Mhm.
What is being lost when people are not connected, and how can we foster real social connection and keep that central to if people are going to be talking to AI chatbots, what is that extra level of disconnection from other people going to mean, and what bad results are there going to be that come from that? So I feel like if there's two things that are going to drive me forward in the rest of my career, whether that's in my personal life, whether that's in my professional life, trying to keep residents connected, which I think about because sometimes that can be really important in their training, or whether that's about telling the world about these things, those are the two pieces that come to mind. I didn't know you were going to ask that question, but that's just off the top of my head.
No.
what I would say.
I love it. I love it. I'll just say, because I know we talked about this before, I'm excited to see what comes of these connections for you, specifically thinking about your professional life, because I know we've talked about how do we take this unique experience that we have as storytellers, as people who hold stories, as people who love sharing narrative in many different forms. How do we bring all of that together and take that forward to achieve exactly what you're talking about: humanity, connection, and through storytelling?
And you're doing that here with this podcast. I mean, I know you and I have talked about working in the media, certainly news organizations, they need experts to talk about mental health. And fortunately, they're covering issues related to mental health, and people are constantly interested in that. So that's another way to get out there and do this. I hope to see you doing more and more of that too.
Yeah, I think we both will. I know I'm definitely moving in that direction too. Yeah. Thank you so much, Daniel, for
Oh my
joining me
gosh, my
today.
pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. This was very fun.
This was awesome. The whole time, I wish people could see my face. I'm just cheesing. I'm like, yes.
I'm mirroring that. So I guess, it's not a video podcast, but hopefully it comes through in our voices.
Exactly. Tell people where they can find you or connect with you.
Well, so I have this podcast. It's called On the Mind. You can find it on all the major audio streaming platforms. It's on YouTube and Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And if you search for On the Mind and put in like Weill Cornell Psychiatry, they put all that in there, it'll pop up. We cover a lot of different topics. I actually am not on social media, which I think is probably bad, because if I wanted to get out there more, I could, but I worry about, again, more disconnection, because I think I get sucked into it. So even though it's ostensibly a kind of connection, but not the real human kind for me. So really the podcast is a great place, and I hope people listen.
Yes. Awesome. Thank you so much again. And thank you all for joining me for another episode of Thriving Outside the Box. And until next time.
Yes.
Yes.